Hello and welcome to Cricket8 Live. I'm Megha and joining me here is Mash. Also, remember to sign up to Cricket8 for some fun games and a lot of these podcasts. Now, Border Gavaskar Trophy is underway. The first test is done and dusted. We're not too far away from the second test scheduled to start on the 6th. We are yet to hear Mash on the topic, that is India's first test win. So, why not pounce on this opportunity here? Your first thoughts.
I think I think fundamentally, do you know what is I the Border Gavaskar Trophy series, BGT, call it what you want. It already had a lot of hype anyway, and in a weird way, New Zealand sweeping India in India has given. I thought it would make this series less hyped, but actually, after the first test match which India won, and also knowing that India effectively have to win 4 of them, you'd think probably has given this series even more hype than it was possible to give. Like India will have to complete some of the if the Gabba series that everyone obviously talks ad infinitum. If India was to win 4-1, 4-0, whatever, I think that would supplant it in terms of having to be clutch when there was no room for error whatsoever. And I mean, I don't want to get too hyperbolic about the first test, but I will call it what it was. India absolutely dominated Australia, and people shouldn't be afraid to use such words. But you have to assume, just because it's in Australia, and yes, I know India have won the past 2 series, etc. But you have to assume that if there's one thing we know about the Australians, you don't get to humble them, not India, but anybody, you don't get to humble them too many times before they come fighting back. So that's not to say that India can't win the series, but it's more to say that it would be a shock if Australia can't respond in some shape or form. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen in Adelaide. But I'm just saying it would be a shock if at some point Australia can't respond. But if having a psychological advantage is a thing in cricket, India have it right now because Australia have got a lot of questions to ask themselves ahead of this second test.
These are crazy times for international cricket, test cricket in particular, because starting from say August, we saw Bangladesh whitewashing Pakistan, Bangladesh being whitewashed by India at home, but nothing surprising about it. Of course, India are dominant, used to be very dominant at home for 12 years. But that second test, the manner in which India defeated Bangladesh with not much time to play, and then India being defeated 3-0 by New Zealand. New Zealand at the moment struggling against England. And similarly with Pakistan being defeated by Bangladesh at home and then going on to defeat England 2-1. So it's all pretty crazy at the moment. Sri Lanka, for that matter, defeating New Zealand 2-0 and at the moment struggling against South Africa and struggling pretty badly against South Africa, having been bundled out for 41. Again, coming back to the Border Gavaskar Trophy, not too dissimilar to how it started for India last time around. Having said that, the previous 2 series that India won, they were very well fought. It wasn't like it was one-sided at any point, and India had to fight really hard to win. Even the draws, they were well fought. This first test, certainly not well fought. Australia didn't look anywhere in command, barring, say, the first innings when they bundled out India for 150. From there on, there are some issues that get magnified. This was Australia's second successive loss at home, including the one against West Indies at the start of the year. Now, Labuschagne's form. Steve Smith no longer opening, but still, that form hasn't been great. And Labuschagne, since the time he made his debut, he's been fantastic, barring this year and the year before this, averaging around 34. This year, his average is further depleted. So, how do you see India responding to those issues in form?
It kind of feels like it feels like a watershed moment for Australia. You look at that top. Let's take Head and Marsh out of it for a moment. Let's just look at the top 4, right? So Usman Khawaja right now, is he? Let me just double check. Is he 38 or is he 30? He's 37. He's going to be 38 very, very soon. Okay.
Hmm.
You've got McSweeney, who's obviously on debut and looked a bit like, rightly or wrongly, granted he's facing Jasprit Brumrah, but looked like a rabbit in headlights on
Yeah.
Test debut. You got Steve Smith, as you've alluded to, who's been shunted up the order, down the order, but certainly. Do you know what? I'd put Smith and Coley in the same bracket in so much as people have been quick to say, not, I wouldn't say to write them off, but to say they're in decline. But with Smith, you have to assume a great good player is still in there somewhere,
Yeah.
but you can't ignore the signs. And as you said, Labuschagne, he's in the team right now based on what he's done in the past, right? And I guess I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, are the Australian, McSweeney's obviously new, but are the
Hmm.
Australian batting order, or the top six, if we now include Head and Marsh, are they going to naturally reach an end of a cycle?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
that's what I said at the top of the show. Are we reaching that point
Hmm.
of difficult questions that they have to ask themselves? Now, obviously, in the middle of an India series, that's not the time to have those questions. And generally speaking, teams don't make major kind of they most teams wouldn't make major decisions to drop formerly gun players. It would be a big shock if they suddenly said, right, it looks like Steve Smith's on the decline, out he goes of an India series, or McSweeney doesn't look up to it, out he goes. Like, you've got to kind of assume they're going to find a way through, because historically they've always found a way through. But you look over the horizons and you think, how many more series have some of these guys got in them? Because if you can't perform in the top series,
Yeah.
how many more have you got in? How many more have they got in them? So really, to flip that question back onto India, India should be looking at that top six, thinking they're there for the taking. They're there
Hmm.
for the taking, and it's not India who's got the issue here. It's the Australian top six that have to find a way to find form in the middle of this series, and this is what they're paid the big bucks for. So if I'm the Indian bowling attack, I'm thinking, right, we're well on top. We're the
Hmm.
ones giving them a lot to think about. And if India produce the same performance with the ball in Adelaide, I mean, we can return to answer this question should that happen after this next test. But I wonder if then certain people might actually get dropped.
Hmm.
So they're getting this next test regardless, but there could be a difficult question posed after the second one if they can't produce.
Now, another difficult question is, and not again, not too very dissimilar to the case that India grapples with at home when the wicket spins too much, when the
Mm,
track spins too much, it becomes difficult for India. It's almost like it works against India, like we saw in the New Zealand series.
mm.
Similarly, for Australia as well, when and more so in the last few years, the pacier and bouncier it gets, the more difficult it gets for Australia's batters and Australia in general in terms of results. We've seen that they've struggled when the wickets have been way too bouncy and pacey. So, one, that raises questions over their batting lineup. And we've been talking about this question and discussing this question for a while now. Now, again, McSweeney, his average, I think, progressively gets better the lower down we go up till, say, number five. He was asked to open for Australia A, did fairly well, and then again got to open in his test debut. Did he look impressive enough for that slot? And then we are talking about Khwaja's issues. Is he on decline? Steve Smith not at the top of his game. Labuschagne struggling. Mitchell Marsh, we're not really sure about his fitness for the upcoming test because 17 overs, that's the most he's bowled in the last many years. And since the IPL, he bowled only four. In the game in which he bowled, that was an ODI game and he had to sit out for the next one. So they're also considering Webster, who has huge body of work in domestic cricket. In McSweeney's case, he does have a good body of work. Overall average is not that impressive, but he's improved in the last couple of years. So the youngsters that Australia have drafted in, want to draft in, your thoughts on the same? And overall, how do you see them? How do you see their lineup shaping up for the next game?
Well, let's deal with McSweeney first. I think it. what message? What message would you be sending? So Nathan McSweeney, just for the benefit of the audience, he's 25 years old, right? So on Test match debut, he's had a bit of a shocker. What
Yeah.
message would you be sending if after one test you said, "Boy, he doesn't look like he's up to this," and he might not be. He might actually not be up for this. But they have to give him the whole series. They have to,
Yeah.
just because
Whole.
once you've decided that's the guy, is unless they're deciding randomly in the middle of the series, right? David Warner, are you prepared to come back out? Unless they're going to suddenly decide something like that, you have to give him the whole series, and then any judgment that has to be made will have to be made at the end of a 5 test match series, right? For some international teams, 5 test matches is 3 series worth, right? Do you see what I mean? So you're in the Lions' den. You've got 5 test matches against the same opposition to prove if you belong at the top level. He's not going anywhere. Um, in terms
And
of,
anyway,
yeah,
Warner's used to landing his helicopters on the ground. So happened in the Big Bash last time around. So
I think the bigger question, more so than if they do any, I like to say, I expect the batters to all go again for the second test. They might even all go again for the third test, depending on what happens in the second. They could lose the second test, so India could win it, but it's all about, sometimes with wins and losses, it's actually about how you win and how you lose. Like if the second test India win it, but it's a thriller, then maybe you're not looking at, oh, do we need to make any changes? So it's more about the manner of the win or the defeat that can make you think about
yeah.
how you change your lineup. I think the bigger issue, and I think India may have this issue as well, is in modern cricket, and I'll be intrigued to see what you say about this. In modern cricket, and I'm thinking more so bowlers than batters, can you really expect your bowling attack to go back to back to back to back in a 5 test match series?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the Aussies bowling attack, and granted, there's a bit of a gap between the first and the second test, but after that, you've got the third, the fourth, the
2
fifth,
back to
right?
back. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And similarly for India, obviously, there's Mohammed Shami to come back, but can whose bowling attack can hold up better? I think that's actually the low key question we should really be thinking about, rather than looking at the batting, because changes will have to come at some point in the series through sheer load management and rotation. And it's more for me, who's got the better strength in depth with the bowling, and particularly another thing that you raised here. Let's say Australia's response to these bouncy wickets is to say, okay, let's prepare a flat one. Let's prepare a flat one later on in the series. Whose bowling attack is more durable? Should Australia decide, right, we can't just keep serving up wickets that India can out bowl us on. Let's put a flat wicket. Whose bowling attack is better for a flat wicket? So do you see what I mean? So there's actually a different type of question for me about who's got the better depth when it comes to bowling. Australia have relied on their kind of Stark, Hazelwood, Cummins, Lyon. We know that's their bowling attack, but what's underneath? And similarly for India, what's underneath should they have to rotate?
They have Boland who has great numbers at home. But again, we saw that in the series against England. The backups, or the ones that were second in line, they started getting injured, and there was no stopping that, because one after the other, it was all the players getting injured. Now, Sharif Mohammed is talking about Mohammad Shami, and he's pointing out that BCCI is in no hurry to send Shami over. Probably that's also because in his comeback from injury after that surgery, it there were multiple setbacks that he faced. We were given different timelines in the media. We heard of different timelines. He wanted to feature in the first Ranji game for Bengal, couldn't. So probably that's the reason why the BCCI is so cautious at the moment, and his workload is being very carefully managed, even when he's featuring for Bengal, be it in the Syed Mustaq Ali Trophy or before that in the Ranji Trophy. So again, talking about depth and the strength that India has when it comes to its bench. Last time around in the Border Gavaskar Trophy, it showed that it has backups that can fit in the 11 and take it on seamlessly from there. But again, talking about bowling attack in terms of quality, Australia has some really impressive names for the conditions that can be ideal backups. I think more than it's more about Jasprit Bumrah at the moment. Jasprit Bumrah, I'm pretty sure India at some point would want to rest him, and that happens in every test series. Every test series that features
Mm,
multiple tests, India wants to manage him very carefully. Now, with India having started with a win, and if India go on in the same vein, then they get that luxury. But what happens if the series gets tricky, considering how crucial it is from the point of view of WTC as well? So that's an
mm,
interesting question. And we've seen with the Australian Pacers that last season, particularly, they held on pretty well. They didn't allow anybody else to sneak in. They shouldered the bowling workload and did well this time around as well. The hype was building because the conversations were around BGT, and players were accordingly, their workloads were managed accordingly. Pat Cummins didn't feature in anything after MLC because he was preparing for the Border Gavaskar Trophy. But probably they are well rested, and they've taken their rest well. And then from there, how they take it, that's going to be interesting. You pointed out a comment.
uh, which one? Sorry. Um,
Did you, or
this
was it
one.
accidental?
No, no, no. But funnily
Hit the
enough, now
frame.
you've given me the chance to. They can bring up the one from. You bring up the one from Vignesh Ram.
Hmm.
Not the
Okay.
last one. The one about Australia bowling is better in
Hmm.
flat.
Yeah. Here we go.
Here we go. Yeah. So Vignesh says Australia bowling is better overall in flat pitches. But I think he's saying here, but India's batters are better than Australia's batters. And the reason I wanted to bring that one up is if Australia produced a flat pitch, who do you think it would favour? Obviously, now we don't, and the reason I say that is because we rarely get draws in Test match cricket now.
Yeah.
The most Test matches seem to end in on day four. Even
Just
like
one this year, right?
yeah, West
Just
Indies played
one this
Bangladesh
year.
last week, and that ended like in the first 30 minutes of day five. So matches rarely go into a day five, right? But say Australia did produce a kind of flat one, those ones where it's like Australia, where they're used to like scoring 500 plus within the first day and a half, and so on and so forth for first 2 days. Given that draws rarely happen, what do you think would happen if those conditions were served up? Do you think it favours Australia, or do you think it favours India?
Australia would probably come more into play without really being the overwhelming favorites, because there too, there's not much to separate these two sides. I mean, whatever the conditions, when you look at the 11 that they can field, their first 11s, there's not much separating these two sides.
Mm, mm,
Be it bouncy wickets, because Australian batters themselves are struggling on the same. Uh, Seaming wickets, a lot of swing. You wouldn't expect that as much. Maybe for the day night test, you'd see more of it, but otherwise, bounce and pace or flat wickets. Do you see, barring the Adelaide Test, do you see a lot of pace and swing and seam?
that point though you made about Bumrah, because actually we should have addressed that. You said that in a multi-test match series, India like to manage Bumrah.
Yeah.
But because India have to win 4 test matches, you think, well, I think they have to win 4 to be certain of getting to the World Test Championship. Um,
So three more
Final, so,
basically.
yeah, they can't rest him, surely. Well, where's where's the fine line between India have to win 4 and Bumrah might need a rest at some point? Or do you think the plan would be, let's go, he'll play the first 4, hopefully India win them all, and then he can get rested for the 5th? Or do you think they would find a way to rest him regardless, because you've got to manage his body?
I think they take it one test at a time. That was the case
Mm,
during the England series as well. India hadn't sealed the series, yet there were strong rumors during rounds of Jasprit Bumrah being rested. But he did feature, again, the series was sealed, and then Bumrah got the much deserved rest. But overall, in the last 6 months, because the tests have not lasted the duration, Bumrah didn't have to bowl a whole lot, whether
mm,
that be that Bangladesh series or the games that he featured in against New Zealand. So, in terms of number of overs bowled, he hasn't bowled a whole lot of overs. So, I think that too would be important, because bundling Australia out for within 100 in the first test did help India in the first innings, because then again Bumrah didn't bowl as much. It helped India in multiple ways, one of them being the bowlers were fresh. And again, the
Mm.
second innings as well, they were not tested for long. So it also depends on the number of overs that he's bowled. And apart from that, in the training and stuff, he'd be managed well. So it would be one game at a time.
Okay. Well, I mean, we'll see, and I think finally the last point, if you bring up Sharon Tank's point here, um,
Mhm.
I think the last point he's got about Scott Boland in Adelaide. So he
I'm
says when
trying to
he
dig it up.
comes up,
Yeah,
yeah, he says that
found it.
he's assuming that Australia will play Scott Boland in Adelaide, and I tend to agree. Scott Boland, great kind of top of off bowler, gets that tiny little hint of movement that you need. It's a day nighter, pink ball, etc. Are there reasons for India to fear the fact that Adelaide's a different kind of test? And I like to say, I think they will bring Boland in, maybe for. In fact, I don't know who they'll swap him for. Maybe Mitchell Stark. I don't know. But are there reasons for India to be fearful of Adelaide, or do you think India are at a point where they're like, our bowling attack is just as good as Australia? So even if Scott Boland was to come in, and even if India were to come under serious examination in Adelaide, they'd trust their bowlers to do the exact same to Australia's batting lineup. Do you think there's an
Well,
advantage for Australia in that sense, or not?
this, as far as recent memory is concerned, it isn't that great because of last BGT. But I think because of the first test win and the lopsided nature of it, India would get into the Adelaide Test with a lot of confidence. Had that not been the case, and add to it the three tests lost to New Zealand at home, India probably would have been tentative. But with the win and the confidence from that, I think India would back its resources. And they have a lot of players who can, in fact, even like I mentioned earlier, even in fast bowling, now they have multiple names. Akashdeep didn't get a look in, and he could be effective when it comes to swinging the ball up front or
Mm.
skidding the ball. So he's good with that. Mohammad Siraj, he was struggling. He must have been struggling for confidence as well, was struggling for form for sure in the home tests, and barring that Chennai test against Bangladesh, he struggled throughout. But him as well coming back to form, and he does well overseas. So all of that would kind of bolster India's confidence. And then Harshit Rana making his debut and showing that confidence that he's got a lot of skills beyond just being hit the deck bowler. So I think all of that would inject a lot of confidence into India.
So the question that everybody in the chat wants to be answered, of course, is who do we think will win uh, in Adelaide? That's really the question
As
people want
straightforward
answers here.
as it gets.
um, you can go first. You can go first. I, yeah, who India go in with more confidence, but who do you think is better? I'm going to put two questions. Who do you think is better suited for Adelaide, and who do you think will win in Adelaide, all things being equal and everyone's fit and so on and so forth?
I think Australia is more suited to it, but India have the edge here. Also, gauging by the sort of display that Australia put, not just in terms of their performance, but also in terms of their body language or their responses to the crisis situations that sprung up during the first test. It was very unlike Australia. You see them in command, you see them in control, you see them aggressive. That was missing. I think more than the result, it's that what concerns me from a neutral cricket fan's point of view. As an Indian fan, I don't care. I'm fine with it.
I will just say, with these pink ball tests, so much is dependent on who's batting at what stage of the day,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so I guess toss will be important. What I do know is that I think both bowling lineups are good enough to exploit the pink ball, right? So that's why I think it's hard for me to call. I'll definitely concede that India go into the game and should be going into the game believing they are better than Australia. Whether they are or not is irrelevant. They should be going into the game believing they are,
Hmm.
right? But I think a lot hinges on toss and who's batting under lights when, because both teams have reasons to believe that the other's bowling attack could cause some serious damage. So this is when someone like a Rishabh Pant is worth the weight in gold, because I often find or feel, sorry, that when India are under siege and it looks like the other bowling attack is like ripping for everyone, Pant seems to be the only player in that team who can play outside of whatever the conditions are doing. Like no matter what, he seems to have a
Hmm.
style of play. It doesn't always come off, but he's got a style of play that means he's never inhibited. Even if he nicks off and he's out for under 10, the point is he doesn't seem to feel inhibited by conditions and his ability to counter attack. And it's those type of players like your Pants and maybe for Australia, your Travis Heads, those players who trust themselves to counter attack in spite of the bowlers, in spite of the conditions, that could be the difference maker in a day night test or in a pink ball test.
Before we conclude this topic, let's quickly summarize what the comment section says. So, good to great says India should not push KL Rahul down the order. Now, as his confidence is high at the top, if still Gill needs to play, he can do so at number 6. That is interesting. Pujara, by the way, was suggesting that Gill should be batting at number 5. Rohit Sharma should either be opening or be batting at number 3. Rohit Sharma for sure would be back. Gill is progressing well. Uh, Vignesh is talking about Pat Cummins' form. He did look slightly rusted in the first test, didn't look entirely prepared. Stark would be the key in the next test, is what a lot of people are commenting. And it looks highly likely that if Gill does come back, Padikkal obviously makes way for Rohit Sharma, and then probably Dhruv Jurel makes way for Gill. But what the batting order looks like, that would be an interesting question. And I think it pretty much covers what the conversations have been for the series as far. There is Opes who's saying batters' confidence may also come to play. Indian batters might be entertaining, maybe entering the field with more confidence than the Australian batters, and that could be the difference. There's another point that I want to make. For example, in Australia's case, and we're talking on paper, Pat Cummins, Mitchell Stark, Josh Hazelwood. There's not much separating them. They're all absolutely top class. India has Bumrah, who is head and shoulders above everyone else. Then Mohammad Siraj, he can at times be unreliable. You don't know which Mohammad Siraj is going to turn up for the test. On his day, when on song, he can be absolutely lethal, but the other side of the spectrum is pretty tricky. Harshit Rana is still raw. Akash Deep has not done anything particularly wrong in the test that he has played. And then Mohammad Shami, if he joins, whenever he joins, of course, brings in that experience. But marginally better is what I believe Australia's bowling lineup in total, with all the players that it boasts of. And then there was a comment saying Ravindra Jadeja should be back. He has good numbers in Australia and he can bat well with the tail. Your thoughts on Indian spinners? So, do you see Washington Sundar being the sole spinner?
I mean, I'm not expecting. You would think in a day-nighter that spin's not the priority here.
Yeah.
That said, Australia will obviously play Nathan Lyon because they play him in all conditions because he's better than whatever the conditions are, right? So it can
And also
be
the
pro
bowling
pace.
workload point of view.
Yes, exactly. So it can be pro pace, and Nathan Lyon's going to play regardless, right? So this is one of those rare test matches where I'd actually say that the priority with the spinner for India should be who can bat. Whoever's the best batter out of the spinners available is the person who should probably play. Because I just refuse to believe that in a day-night test or pink ball test, that spin should be your priority. Yes, to manage the workload of the pacers, but not in terms of that shouldn't be your priority in terms of, right, this is going to be critical to us taking 20 wickets. So I think you have to look at your spinners and decide who is the person who can probably add the most runs lower down the order and still be all right. And that's the person who should take the spot.
And now, can we finally move on to the New Zealand England test? At the moment, England looking on top. Harry Brook once again impressing, and his sixth century, fifth away from home. Though he did get a lot of chances, but he made the most of them. And New Zealand, probably the soft dismissals, the batters looked set and then gave away their wickets. They'd be thinking about all of that pretty frequently as they feel, because the wicket is getting better and WTC points are at stake. They are well in contention. They were well in contention ahead of the series, and they'd want to consolidate on the chance that they created by defeating India 3-0.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, and I'm going to start with. I mean, New Zealand know what they need to do. They need to
Yeah.
win. If they have any real ambition to reach the World Test Championship final, they've got to find a way to win. And having said in the past that draws don't really happen anymore, I'm not going to say this Test match is going to be a draw, but I do think the conditions to bat are improving in
Yeah.
that Test match. So anyone who forces a victory will have to bowl really well. I just don't see well, obviously a team can collapse, but I just don't see, famous last words, I don't see New Zealand just giving wickets away the second time they bat. But it's going to be very hard for New Zealand to force a victory from here. The advantage with playing England is sometimes England defeat themselves, and it's not even so much about what the opposition do. So right now, they close of day two, they're what, 3-1 at the time of recording, they're 3-1-9 for 5. Now, when you're 3-1-9 for 5, you're supposed to be looking at the opposition score and saying, right, we can set a real 100 plus run lead here if we bat sensibly. There's no need for England to go into day 3 and say, right, we're going to bat as quick as possible because we're here to entertain and it's about moving the game along quickly. Yeah, you can do that, but you can also bat sensibly and just set a lead of 100 and 100 to 100 to 150 without having to take undue risk. There's plenty of time in the game. I don't know if England are wedded to their ideology of you must bat a certain kind of way when you play for England. So we'll see if they can press home any kind of advantage. Obviously, for New Zealand, if England succumb to their ego, which seems to be the thing that defeats them, then New Zealand can maybe press to put themselves in an advantage and chase a victory. What I would say, though, and there's been quite a lot said about it, social media, within the media, maybe it's a whole lot of nothing, but I found Ben Stokes's comments about I think he said something like, I don't really understand the World Test Championship. It's so confusing to me. And I just found that a bit of a weird statement to make, right? And I don't know if that's England trying to, I don't know if that's the England camp trying to be like, oh, we're above the World Test Championship, so we're just going to keep on doing our thing because we're playing such a different brand of cricket to everyone else that it doesn't even matter to us about the World Test Championship because there's nothing. It's the way it's set up is silly, but it's not confusing. Cricket's still cricket. Win games, you'll get to the final. Like it's not that confusing. Win some games, and you will get to the final of the World Test Championship.
And don't lose points for over 8.
Yeah, exactly. So I found that comment maybe like deliberately obtuse or like disingenuous, and sometimes I'm just like, I get it, right? I get that England are doing things different, right? And they believe that they're doing the right things, and there's certainly some fundamental changes that could be made to the World Test Championship. But I will just say this, it's quite interesting to me that we're entering the final stages of the World Test Championship and India are locked in, knowing they need to win games. Australia are locked in, knowing they need to win games. New Zealand know they need to win games. South Africa know they need to win games. Sri Lanka need to win games. So do you mean to tell me that those 5 teams all know and are all taking it seriously and saying, well, we could still get to the World Test Championship final, and England are the only team going, oh, it's really confusing, this. It doesn't really make sense to us. So to me, that's the kind of subscript of what's going on in this Test match, because it makes me just wonder, so what are England playing cricket for then? If it's so confusing to them, what is their purpose behind Test match cricket? Because I know those other 5 teams are all trying to win to make a final. Even West Indies, we're trying to win to make sure we don't end last. Like so everyone else seems to understand why they need to win, except England. So I just found that quite interesting.
I think for him it's art for art's sake, and he's also walking the talk because isn't really bothered that much. Obviously he would be, but maybe not as much about the over 8 penalty, and then lot of other moves that gave one the impression that England weren't really looking at WTC. And here you are, there are 5 teams still in contention, including Sri Lanka. England got out of the contention, I think, as soon as they lost the series against Pakistan. So Probably that's why he's confused, because at the moment they are nowhere in contention to make it to the finals. But talking about their personnel and their resources, Bashir has been backed about it would soon be 12 months since he made his debut, and has been backed regardless of the conditions, picking up 4 wickets. And apart from that, Bell had been struggling. Pope rather had been struggling. Oli Pope had been struggling at number 3, struggled massively in Pakistan, and now being sent to number 6 position, he actually scored runs and got a half century, kept wickets as well. So where do you see him fitting in? Moving on from here, does number 6 become his position? But when Smith is back,
Well, this is the question. So sometimes, do you know I call those kind of things a good dilemma to have. It's better
yeah,
to have players performing and giving you um giving you things that you have to solve, giving you different issues that you have to solve, rather than trying to fit players in that aren't performing and you're having to justify why you're still picking them, right? So let's just say, argument's sake, across the rest of this series, Ollie Pope makes runs at number 6, and whilst he's wicket keeping, then England have a problem, and it's a good problem. Sometimes you find out stuff about players when you're least expecting it, right? So they've made the decision to put Jacob Bethel at number 3.
yeah,
Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. But if it does work, again, it gives them a good problem to have. Every single team, international team in the world, should be striving to have a situation where they know, in an ideal world, India are very close to having it. Then where you know that for every position in the team, there is somebody else who is
yeah,
challenging that person's spot. The weakest teams in the world are the ones where players' spots just aren't under threat by anybody. Not because that player's so good, like a Virat Kohli type thing, but just because there's no one actually there, right?
hmm,
So England should be embracing the fact that Pope's made runs at 6 whilst wicket keeping, and just note it down and say, maybe we've had his spot wrong all along. But they can evaluate that at the end of the series, and Jamie Smith shouldn't feel any kind of way about it. It's a good, like I say, it's a good problem to have. I'm all for teams. I wouldn't call it experimenting, but I'm all for teams moving players about from time to time if they need to. Sometimes circumstances demand it, just to see if, maybe you'll produce there. Maybe the question people should be asking of England is, why were you persisting with Pope at 3 all along? Why did you not
yeah.
consider maybe putting him in another circumstance? And maybe that's a lesson to be learned as well. So it'll be very, very interesting what happens when Jamie Smith is back, if they just put Pope straight back at 3 again, despite the
Hmm.
evidence suggesting that might not be the best spot for him. We'll see.
I think Smith also probably cemented his spot before asking for that rest, and he probably assessed and realized that his spot wouldn't be under threat. Had
Mm,
Cox maybe done well, not gotten
mm.
injured, and done well, probably then it would have been an interesting question. And what is it with teams promoting players, be it McSweeney or, for that matter, Bethel at number 3? So they're all the teams putting players in positions they've not really tried before or not really been at before. Now, talking about Sri Lanka and South Africa. South Africa clearly on top at the moment. Sri Lanka have lost 2 wickets, lost one pretty quickly as well, getting bundled out for 41. And that spell and overall performance from Marco Jansen in the first innings, 7 for 13. And probably that's a record in a way, the quickest to get 7 wickets. The fewest balls taken, joint fewest for 7 wickets.
So I had the pleasure of, I was in Trinidad in the summer to watch West Indies versus South Africa in the first test? The first test match, yeah, which
Hmm.
ended in a draw.
The draw,
And
yeah.
I think what South Africa have done really well, because they have they've done what teams like West Indies, maybe you'd even throw New Zealand in there, although God granted New Zealand just won in India. But they've done what you should be doing if you don't have the resources to match the so-called bigger three, or certainly the bigger two. I don't know if England deserve to be in the big three. But South Africa have created or cultivated a circumstance where the top players that they've got have all bought into the fact that you should want to play for South Africa at all times. Now, obviously, there was that series a couple of years back or last year where they sent like a C or D team to New Zealand, but the head
Earlier this
coach,
year, yeah.
yeah, it was right. So the head coach, Conrad, has managed to create that environment where the top players essentially know we are needed here, there, and there. Lock in for it. This is what we're working towards. Janssen didn't play in the Caribbean, but I was told by the South African press that the whole point with Janssen was they were deliberately kind of letting him stay at home and rest and recuperate, knowing that he was going to be needed at the back end of the year for such a series like Sri Lanka. So I feel like the South Africans have cultivated the right test match atmosphere where everyone knows what they're in the team to do, when they are going to be required, what their role is going to be. And as unlikely as it sounds, let's just say India don't pull off the 4 wins they need in Australia, and the final ends up being the World Test Championship final ends up being, which is what I think is the most likely thing at this moment in time, ends up being Australia versus South Africa, right? I think a lot of people, when it comes round to that, if that was the final, will say, how did South Africa end up in the final? They're not even that good. I think that's what the narrative will be. But when you actually look at their side, you look at their batting lineup and you're like, well, there are no real stars in that batting lineup. But they've got a bowling attack. They've got a genuine bowling attack that can rip through pretty much any side in the world. And as long as, similar to what New Zealand did in India, as long as the culture is correct and everybody believes in that purpose of we are going to overperform, or we're going to be greater than the sum of our parts, it makes sense how South Africa would manage to get themselves into a final. So I think people should be watching South Africa particularly Indian fans, should be watching South Africa very keenly over the next however many months, because if they win these 2 test matches versus Sri Lanka and then win the 2 versus Pakistan, I assume they're going to be in the final. You have to assume
if they win at all,
and you have to assume that they will be the team that's there. So the other spot can only be Australia or India at that point. So I think a lot of eyes should be on what South Africa are doing.
And the fireball says that South Africa making the final after sending a Z team against New Zealand would be funny. And that was because of the clash with SA20. The schedules were decided well in advance with New Zealand. And New Zealand obviously did not have any other window to fit that series. So the side that they sent and the loss that they faced, the first in history in New Zealand series loss, that did kind of create issues with their chances for WTC. Now, considering that they're playing all 2-match series, it did also put them right back in contention when they won the one against New Zealand, or rather won the one against West Indies. The first test was drawn and then defeated Bangladesh 2-0, and they're once again back in contention. There's another thing that I want to talk about, the understanding between their coaches, Webster and Walter and Conrad. This thing around managing the pacers and ensuring that whenever they take the field, they are at their best. That was something that was decided in unison. And Walter probably understood the need to rest these players ahead of the crucial test series. And you wouldn't see that happening all the time, because at the end of the day, Walter is responsible and answerable for his team's performances in white ball. Yet he was okay with the top players being rested for the test series because South Africa were in with a chance for the WTC finals.
I just think it's sensible. Not all international teams have the ability to pay their players enough to guarantee that they will all appear when you need them to appear. So you just have to every team has to find the best format, not format of cricket, but the best format by which their players buy into what is required for the national team and when, right? And primarily, like I say, I look at New Zealand, I look at West Indies, I look at South Africa, who are the three that I think most need to adapt to this message, which is that, okay, yes, you've got all these different T20 leagues that most of our best players want to play in and so on and so forth. But here is and this is what I call it, here is your roadmap for the year. We know you want to play this, and this. So Kagiso Rabada, we know you want to play IPL, this, and this. Cool. But you see these test match series, we are going to pick you. So ideally, how do we make this work? And I just think that's how teams have to start approaching it, right? If you don't have the luxury of being able to play a player 2 million per annum for a multi-format, a multi-year contract, you have to sit down with them and work out the best roadmap to get the best out of your players when you need them, that also fits in with the ever-changing T20 global market that they want to also maximize their earnings in. And I think South Africa, having been ridiculed for what they did, and rightly so, for what they did when they sent that weakened team to New Zealand. But here's the thing. Go back and look at that team that they sent to New Zealand. Lots of those players are in the team now. So it was as weakened as that team was. They've trusted some of those players who went to New Zealand, who are still part of the setup now, who they've said, you know what, you showed us something there, we can rely on you. So that it wasn't even a wasted series in that regard. Even that has played into something to do with how they now approach their international side.
The level of optimism when you remarked that that wasn't a wasted series. But South African fans might complain about the WTC points lost there. Vignesh, probably this would be the last comment that we take before we summarize. Pitches are poor in South Africa. Rabada is an extreme threat, but others can be handled on a good pitch. Now, it was expected, it was kind of conjunctured that the wicket would help spinners. It has done in the past. 2019 Sri Lanka won because it helped its spinners, but it didn't turn out to be so. The overnight rains and the conditions complicated it for the batters, and eventually the pacers had to say, maybe as the match progresses and there's not much left, it seems so that the spinners might come into picture. But in any case, we started with this question and I throw it back to you. Your predictions for this series, all three of those, whether be it Border Gavaskar Trophy, South Africa, Sri Lanka series, and England, New Zealand. How do you see the eventual scoreline?
Right, so Australia, India. I think it's going to end 3-2, but I don't know who to. Assuming that rain doesn't wash out any of the games, and assuming that we don't get any draws, because we never get draws these days, I think it ends 3-2. Only because I just don't see. Surely Australia can't get whitewashed, can they? Anyway, but I'll say 3-2. I'll say 3-2, but I don't know who to. I certainly wouldn't rule out India winning the series, though. England, New Zealand, so that's a 3 test match series. Again, assuming that no draws are possible. Do you know what? I think England might win it. I think England might win it 2-1. So I'm going to go England 2-1 in that one. Which again would just sum up how chaotic Test cricket has been. New Zealand just beat India, and now I'm saying that England will beat New Zealand. New Zealand beat India, but now I'm saying India might beat Australia. It's
and then, whitewash Australia.
Yeah, right, okay. So
said that.
And then the only one that I'm certain of is that South Africa will beat Sri Lanka 2-0. That one, I just don't think Sri Lanka have the batting to cope with the South African attack if South Africa put a wicket up that allows their pacers to run havoc. And if they do, I just don't see how Sri Lanka cope with it.
All right, then. So that's all the time we have for this podcast. There is a comment that might trigger a debate. We'd not start it amongst ourselves, but in the comment section, we'd invite a debate. Vignesh says only if the ball spins more than ordinary, it's a bad pitch. Ball seeming more than 1 degree is a good pitch. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you so much, Mash. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Remember to support us by subscribing and sharing, but also signing up at cricket8.com, where live scorecards cover 8,000 matches a year with advanced visual details that tell you who is actually in front in the game.